All right, let's talk about Cobra Kai. Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to PsychoBible. Now, you might be saying, what are you doing? Why are you talking about Cobra Kai? Like, your channel is supposed to be about Christian psychology and sexuality issues, and quiet! It's my channel. I can do what I want. Hey, I'm a child of the late 80s. I grew up on Karate Kid and Ninja Turtles and Chuck Norris and Delta Force and like that's my stuff. That was my jam. So I could not wait to start taking karate classes. We couldn't afford it for years. So my younger brother and I, we would just lay out a mat or hardly anything, and we would just spar and teach ourselves what we could until finally, when I was in high school, we could take actual karate lessons. And quickly, my brother and I, we rose to the ranks, got our black belts, and then we started teaching the other students. And it's so funny. If you grew up on Karate Kid, you watch that All Valley tournament where Daniel-san puts his leg up and does that crane move, and you're thinking, that's cool, I can't wait to learn that. And then when you actually start taking classes, you're like, psh, that's just a reverse front snap kick. That is not a big deal. But, you know, it's still awesome. So when they announced that they were doing a spin-off of the Karate Kid, and I saw the first trailers to Cobra Kai, I was like, this looks great. Especially with the fact that they're taking it and it's all from the perspective of Johnny. Because this was a couple years after there's already a meme going around about how Johnny was the real victim and like he was robbed and Daniel kicked him illegally. Because you see in the tournament, Johnny got points against him for kicking Daniel-san in the face, and yet Daniel-san kicks him in the face and he wins the tournament. What's the deal? And so there's been the memes going around. There's a whole YouTube video about how Johnny was robbed and Daniel-san was the real bully in the movies. And I kind of agreed because when I grew up watching the movies, I didn't really like Daniel-san. He was really annoying. So I was ready for this show to be real tongue in cheek and just make fun of itself. But what surprised me was how much it makes fun of ourselves. I'm surprised this show even got made. Like in 2018, 2019, 2020, it really shines a mirror on us and our society. It blasts social justice warriors and our PC, politically correct culture. You got the protagonist, Johnny Lawrence. He's berating this current generation of coddled, weak keyboard warriors.
My guidance counselor says that certain words perpetuate the sexist worldview that can trigger.
Quiet! We do not allow weakness in this dojo. So you can leave your asthma and your peanut allergies and all that other made up bull outside. Is that understood?
Nice shirt.
Thanks.
I'm joking, it sucks.
Back in my day, if you wanted to tease someone, you did it to their face. These geeks hiding behind their computers. What a bunch of spineless losers. All your lives, you've been avoiding fights. So you don't break your nose or lose a tooth. This concussion nonsense.
Please join me in a moment of silence as we strive to end intolerance in our time.
No, we accept boys and girls.
Gender what?
When that dude from the tournament starts doing a whole speech about social justice and taking a moment of silence, I was dying. That was hilarious. Like, I can't believe they're doing this and people are eating it up. And I love how both Johnny and Daniel are like transported straight out of the 80s. Neither are prepared for this strange new world we live in. When Daniel goes and he starts up Miyagi-Do Karate in season 2, he gets accused on social media of racism and cultural appropriation. It's perfect. It's so what's the opposite of tone deaf? It's so like right there. It knows exactly what's going on in the culture right now. I was really surprised by how the characters are really nuanced. They're fleshed out, but they're also archetypal. There are some timeless themes that emerge. And so why am I talking about this on my channel, which is normally about Christian psychology and sexual issues and gender issues? Well, I want to elucidate some of the themes that are in Cobra Kai, and you'll see how it fits perfectly with everything I've been talking about recently, or for a while. First, whether this show planned it or not, it really shows why we need real men and fathers to step up. In his book, No More Christian Nice Guy, Paul Coughlin straightforwardly lays out the problem. I'm going to read from page 116. There have always been Marvin Milquetoasts, men who are gentle and sensitive. Their gentleness and sensitivity is right in many situations, but wrong when virtue demands that they be strong and straightforward instead. Stemming from unprecedented societal shifts, the problem of all sugar no spice males is worse than ever. All men receive a false, demeaning presentation of masculinity from our culture. This is due primarily to the absence of fathers. An estimated 15 million American children currently live without a father in their home. Other factors include the increase in divorce, homes headed by women, an educational system dominated by women, and radical feminism, which went from a battle for equality to guerrilla warfare on the masculine soul. Paul Coughlin goes on in his book to really explain how niceness is dangerous. And he makes a distinction. This is why I always tell people I don't like niceness. Now, kindness, however, is good. But niceness, you have to understand niceness, it really means just to be agreeable and passive. A nice person will never put the work in to bring healing to others, to care for others properly. A nice person will only do what is necessary to be approved, to not shake the boat, to rock the boat, but just to get enough approval without really having to put much effort into things. That's what nice guys are. Nice does not equal good or honorable or kind. So we have to make sure we make that distinction and put out there as our goal, our standard that we're striving for is goodness and kindness and honor. And so what Paul does in his book, in page 161, he makes a distinction between three types of men. Passive men extend something that looks like grace, a disposition to be generous, helpful, and merciful. However, the reason passive men accept insults and other forms of humiliation is that they fear what might happen with an eruption of conflict, the sound of life happening. They lie to their own hearts, as well as the hearts of others. They hide their feelings and deny their wants and desires, not because of loving sacrifice, but because they don't believe they should have them. And giving up something they never really owned is neither sacrifice nor love. Though they pride themselves on never getting angry, they harbor smoldering resentment, a kind of undisclosed anger of the mind. Their outbursts may do more damage than the actions of aggressive men, who let off steam one frustrated puff at a time. So you see here that in nice guys, there's really a lot of anger. I say that oftentimes, the nicest men are the most angry. It's just below the surface. Things build up, they stuff down their emotions, and it builds up until it blows up. I see this all the time with the guys I work with in my counseling. Now, continuing. Aggressive men are more honest. They're glad to tell you what they're thinking. However, they lack soul-warming grace, a buffer between sound and rash behavior. Aggressive men can be so quick to judge and condemn others that they fail to see the larger and more subtle issues at play and are prone to partial blindness. Accordingly, even though they are true to their feelings, what they express is dubious, just as with passive men. The real world is a tough place. It's survival of the fittest, say aggressive men, until they fall from their wave of strength, experience defeat, or undergo illness, when they might yearn for the mercy they themselves have rarely, if ever, given. Now there's assertive men. It's this type we must seek to be. Our goal is to be like Christ, the assertive one, who extended grace and mercy when it was warranted and spoke the stinging truth when it was called for. Both aggressive and passive men are simmering in the cauldron of insecurity, with fears like smoldering logs beneath. Their fears will keep burning until they are confronted. See, aggression may be a problem for men, and this may be hard to accept, but the greater problem in men is passivity. A few years ago, God led me to Grace Church. They're a church in Greenville, South Carolina, and I was doing research on femininity and masculinity, and I found there that they have these excellent teaching series. They have for women the Azer teaching series where they get into biblical femininity and how women are meant to be like an essential counterpart that bring a strength to a relationship and partnership to others. And then for men, they have Men's Roundtable, where they have a series of teachings, and the core teaching they have is the quest for authentic manhood. So a few years ago, I taught a 12-week study at my church on manhood, and I incorporated this Quest for Authentic Manhood series into my study. And in class 1, Pastor Matt Williams lays out how passivity is the core sin of man.
Let me give you a couple challenges to masculinity. The first one is this, big word, I already mentioned it. Passivity. Passivity is the core sin of man, if you see that in your notes. And so let me say this, passivity is not about personality. This is really, really important to understand. Because the temptation is to think that the guy who is soft-spoken is that he's passive. And the guy who talks all the time, not passive. The guy who's a great leader at work and he owns his own business and he's highly verbal and he just get out there and make it happen, cause things to happen, that person he's not passive. And the person who has another kind of job where there's lots of tight boundaries and, just clock in, clock out, show up, do what you're told, takes instructions real well, is real compliant, is able to follow whatever rules, do whatever, it's great. And that person is passive. Let me just say, those are personality traits. When we say passivity, we mean the spiritual DNA of a man. And we are all going to struggle with it. Personality is going to dictate to a certain degree how we manifest our passivity. So you might manifest it very differently than I do, because our personalities might be very different. And the tendency is to think this real domineering man, he's not passive at all. When here's what I would tell you. The domineering dad is very passive. Because he might be micromanaging and controlling all the issues in his home, and his wife can do this, and here are the rules, and kids can do this, and they can't do that, and he can control and dominate, he's real loud. But here's what he's being passive towards. He's being passive towards the hearts of the people that he's supposed to shepherd. He doesn't really know what they think and what they feel, and he's not cultivating those hearts to be able to think and feel and grow in their relationships because they're just dominated all the time. So he is completely passive to some of the greater issues in life. So let's just be clear on this. Passivity, and same is true for leadership, but passivity is not about personality. Personality just explains how we will express it sometimes.
Now, when my pastor heard this idea of the core sin of man being passivity, he wasn't quite sure. Because he was like, well, when I think about the man's first sin, his core sin, it's rebellion. And, well, they're both correct. So when you understand that God's design for men is to be proactive, to initiate, to bear responsibility, and to lead, then passivity itself is an act of rebellion. When Eve was speaking to that serpent, that deceiver, Adam was right there next to her, and yet he was passive. He didn't take up his responsibility to lead and to correct and protect his wife from deception. And so in his passivity, his neglect of his duty to intervene, he was rebelling against his design by being passive. and it cost us all dearly. And what's great about Cobra Kai, it's Johnny's redemption arc. See, he was trained up in a corrupted and abusive, and we could say toxic, masculinity, aggressive and extreme. And in this world of coddled Zoomers, it's needed. We need some of that aggression to balance out all this, the coddling we see in this Generation Z and some of my millennial friends. And but what he comes to find is the cold, cruel mantra of strike first, strike hard, no mercy. It needs the moderation of assertiveness. Strike first, understood properly, is about taking initiative, being proactive. In this area, we see how Johnny had failed for years to be assertive in his duty as a father. And he shares a story about how when his son was being born, he was too scared. Fear held him back. As Larry Crabb says in the book Fully Alive, it's the fear of weightlessness. That's the core terror of men. That the fear that we won't have what it takes to and to bear any weight, to bring any meaning and weight to a situation and to a relationship. And so we see that in Johnny. He feared that he wouldn't have what it takes to be a good father. So we see even in macho men, the core sin is passivity. He held back. He did not assert himself into his son's life and be the dad that he needed. Just think, if he had been in Robbie's life all along and being salient, a salient father, which remember, what is salient? This is something I've learned a long time ago from Joseph Nicolosi, that a salient father is perceived by the child as both strong and benevolent. Strong and benevolent. So what if Johnny had been a salient father figure in Robbie's life? Would the ending of season 2 even had happened? Okay, so there's a little teaser if you haven't watched the full series yet, or at least the 2 seasons that are out so far. Strike hard. See, that part of the motto or mantra of Cobra Kai, that's about competence and doing everything with all your heart and strength to follow things through to completion. See, when you strike an opponent, you don't stop short. You go as if you're going to punch through their face. So, that's brutal, but that's the reality. And that's a lesson there in how we're meant to, as men, do things well, to follow through to completion. And the final part of that mantra, no mercy. However, that's where he learns the hard way where a line must be drawn. See, there's no mercy. There's no honor in that. There's no honor in being merciless. Like Paul Coughlin was saying, aggression lacks that grace that brings warmth and brings healing to others. It's aggression. If we're just aggressive, then what we're doing is we're moving into a space. We're being masculine, sure, we're moving, but it's not to bless others. See, true masculinity is about moving into the unknown, moving into chaos in order to bring order that blesses others. It's out of love. Remember, love is to will the good of the other for the sake of the other, for the good of the other. But aggression is about use. It's about moving in and maybe wanting the good of the other, but only so you can use them. But what Johnny is learning when he's talking to Miguel is, I will always have your best interests at heart. And he tries to honor that. But he in the process, he fails some of the other students, and to an extent, he realizes he failed Miguel, and so he tries to bring things back. He's like, oh, I taught him too much to be aggressive, and no mercy. I need to teach him mercy is appropriate at times. So this show, it really goes places I didn't think it would go. Whereas Johnny clearly embodies yang, the masculine assertiveness in danger of the consuming extreme of aggression, Daniel LaRusso embodies yin, the receptive feminine, Now, yeah, he's still a male, and he's got some masculinity, but you see in this, he's got more of the feminine in the way he lives. In the Karate Kid movies, Mr. Miyagi taught Daniel-san balance. You saw this kid, he was just full of aggression. And so he needed to learn to balance things, to integrate both the yin and the yang, the masculine assertiveness and aggression with the feminine receptivity and not passivity. Passivity is not feminine, but receptivity, openness. So Mr. Miyagi taught him to integrate both and to bring balance. But in the show Cobra Kai, we see that Daniel had lost his way. He had grown soft. He had grown into a nice guy. You see Daniel's passivity and lack of assertion in his different roles. This is really apparent in his relationship with his son, the chubby kid Anthony. He's not salient to his son. Anthony has no desire to be like his dad. He'd much rather just sit around and consume. Consume food, video games, probably porn, if not now, then later in life. He's got the makings of a future incel. What woman would desire him if he continues on this path? And his dad is just utterly powerless in their relationship. You know, at one point he takes his phone away and the kid just goes and orders another one, and the dad can't do anything about it. It's futile. And you see, every time he tries to get him to karate or to, get in shape or something or start to socialize, he always comes at him asking. That's such a that's the openness in femininity, is to make the question, to make the request, and to open up the space. Is to be the question that the masculine comes in with the answer. And you see, the dad is always coming in with an offer. He's bringing openness to his son, but never clear direction. Never, nope, this is how it's going to be, you're going to do this. Like, his son needs to get on a diet and start exercising, but the dad he's futile. He's got no power in that relationship. And he's allowed his son to be contemptible. And you can see the resentment he has toward his own son. He broke Jordan Peterson's 5th rule for life. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. But you see, Daniel's now resigned to the outcome and ends up investing his energy in other people's kids, namely his rival's own son, Robbie. With his daughter Samantha, he's more active, but he's more like a protective mother than a strengthening father. You see, he's clueless about his daughter's friends and boyfriends, and when he gets suspicious of this guy Kyler, he rushes in like a helicopter parent rather than teaching his daughter to know how a man should treat a woman. He lacks the assertiveness to really move into her life so that he knows what's going on in her heart. If he had known what was going on in her heart, he could have intervened, he could have helped guide her and sort through the conflicting feelings she has about the two different guys she's interested in. And this has tragic consequences in the finale. In his role as husband and business partner to his wife, he's passive in his duties. He redirects all his energy into his side hustle, the Miyagi-Do dojo, neglecting his priority to his wife and then his employees. And so she ends up distrusting him. A nice guy will only do what is necessary to get approval, and so he'll stay in his comfort zone. He won't maintain his duties even when it gets difficult, even when it's not as enjoyable, even when he's got passion elsewhere, because he knows, nope, this is what I have to do. A man he'll man up and do what he has to do, even when there's something more enjoyable he'd rather be doing. So we see that he had gotten soft and passive, and then encountering his old rival awakened his own aggression. But he clearly goes too far. He jumps to conclusions, and he's quick to assume the worst of Johnny and anyone associated with him. He's telling his daughter, oh, all those kids from Cobra Kai are bad. Anyone from there, you can't trust any of them. They're all evil. But the reality is they need each other. They're true complements. And when they're together, they have such chemistry. The scenes when they're actually together, it's like, I just want them to be friends. Can't they get along? You see, Daniel needs some of Johnny's assertiveness, his bluntness, and his edge. And Johnny needs some of Daniel's restraint and his balance and his benevolence. Together they really make a complete man in some ways. Johnny's got most of what we need for masculinity, but he's lacking the balance of restraint, and he's growing though in caring for others. And Daniel, you can see right away, he's caring, he's generous, but he lacks the strength that he needs. All right, and now here's where it gets real meta. It's interesting that this show came out when it did, both on YouTube in 2018 and on Netflix now in 2020, in the middle of our insane culture war. As I've said before, with the rise of intersectionality and the far left, we're seeing a weird type of honor-shame culture overthrow our traditional Western values of individualism and impartiality. These honor-shame dynamics are exhibited in the rivalry between Cobra Kai and Miyagi-Do. It's like an ever-escalating feud between two clans, like a family feud. And they dehumanize the other side. Like I said, Daniel frequently judges Johnny and any of his students, not based on their actions, at least not in the present, but based on their identity as members of Cobra Kai. They're all bad. And so very much it looks at things black and white. All bad in Cobra Kai, everyone else, okay, good. And it leads them to go back and forth. He fights a little bit, he jabs him here, and then so Cobra Kai responds, and this feud just gets worse and worse. And they become these warring ideologies, going even so far as the willingness to kill. Like, I was just shocked. I was getting kind of anxious in that final fight in the school at the end of season 2. It's like, wow, how crazy is this show going to get? And this brings to mind Jordan Peterson's central problem he was trying to solve in his life's work, Maps of Meaning. Why are some groups willing to fight to the brink of annihilation over belief systems? He was reflecting on that question. It was the thing that plagued him and haunted him for years during the Cold War. Why are these countries over ideologies willing to bring about a nuclear holocaust? And what was the solution that he came to? It's like the solution is we need to resurrect the Father, the old traditions, the wisdom of ancient generations, and then update them for the challenges of our modern times.
Like, we have a really well-developed mythology of the exploratory hero, but where we're not so well-developed is the second part, because in the second part of the classic hero story, you're supposed to come back and communicate about what you've found. And so there's a individual exploration element, and then there's a communicate and update the culture element. And both of those are equally important, and it's something that we don't do well. We don't have much respect for tradition in the West, and it's a really, really big problem, because the ethical responsibility of a human being is to take the dead culture, so that's the dead father or the dead God, and to revivify it with attention and communication. And you fail to do that, then everything disappears. And we are failing to do that. We're leaving it all behind instead. It's not a good idea. If the old gods die, as Nietzsche said they had, new gods swoop in very rapidly, and if you think the old god was bad, you wait till the new gods get a hold of you. So, well, we saw what happened in the 20th century, right, with all the ideologies that sprang up in the absence of classical religious belief. It's like, okay, you're not so thrilled with Catholicism if you think about that as, the fundamental tradition of the West, with the witch burnings and the Inquisition and all that. It's like, yeah, well, get a load of the Nazis and then see what you think. So, or the communists for that matter. It's like from bad to worse in an unimaginable way, so, and it's partly because those archaic systems, those archaic religious systems, they weren't ideologies. They're a whole different class of thing. And we don't understand them very well, and it's not good because you cannot live without understanding them. You don't know who you are. And then you fall prey to weird mental diseases like nihilism, that's one. And the other one is ideological possession. So you become a totalitarian or a nihilist, and that's a bad outcome. And you might think, well, what's the alternative? Well, you know what happens in Pinocchio, right? You've watched Pinocchio? Okay, I often show Pinocchio to this class, but I don't know if I'm going to do that this year. But anyways, Pinocchio, he's a puppet, marionette. Someone else is pulling his strings. He has a wooden head. He's not very bright. He hasn't banged around the world at all. He's got a good father, the old Geppetto, who really would rather that he was a real boy, right? A real person. So he's the kind of father that wants to produce an individual and not a slave. So, and that's why, you know, in his workshop it's all friendly and there's a nice fire and he's making toys and there's lots of music. It's like, go Geppetto, he's a good guy. So he makes this little puppet and he sends him out in the world. He says, go be a real boy. Well, Pinocchio runs into a whole class of different obstacles. One is evil, right? That's the coachman, and the Italian stereotype guy who makes him a dancing puppet celebrity, which I think is pretty funny. I mean, that's really prescient, you know, because you might think, well, what's the goal of your typical boneheaded, you know, mid-adolescent in North America? It's like unearned celebrity. Well, that's exactly what Pinocchio goes for first. And that doesn't work out so well because he ends up a slave, and then the next thing that happens is he capitalizes on the fact that he's vulnerable and pretends he's sick and goes off for a vacation under the direction of the coachman, who's basically Satan in disguise. And then he goes out to Pleasure Island, and meets all the delinquents who are just like Nazis, and it turns out that in fact the whole ploy is to enslave everyone, to deprive them of their voice, that's the donkey's braying, and to make them into slaves. Pretty damn horrifying, and that movie came out about the same time that the Nazis were really, you know, grasping power in Central Europe. It's like they got it exactly right. Here's what's really going on behind the scenes. So, and then what happens? Well, Pinocchio turns halfway into a braying donkey because, you know, he's got off the path, and in order to get back on it, he tries to go home. But it's too late. He's grown up. You can't go home. He's not a kid anymore. Goes home and Dad isn't there. Surprise, surprise. Because once you grow up and you go home, Dad isn't there. It's just another human being. So then what happens? Well, then he has to go into the ocean. Now that's particularly weird, right? It's like, there he is, half donkey, he's a puppet. The dove comes down and drops him a message from God. It's like the Holy Spirit descending, except it's actually from the blue fairy, weirdly enough. And the message says, you have to go to the deepest part of the ocean and rescue your father. It's like, yeah, that is what you have to do if you don't want to be a bloody puppet donkey. You have to go down into the depths and find your dead father, and you have to revivify him. And that's what happens. So Pinocchio goes way down there to the deepest depths and finds Monstro, who's a monster so terrible that the fish swim away just at the sound of his voice. Just like, what's his name? He who you shall not be named. Voldemort, right? You can't even say his damn name. Same with Monstro. Pinocchio goes down there, goes into the whale. What happens? Geppetto says there's no getting out of this. There's no getting out of this. We just have to sit here and cook fish. And Pinocchio thinks, cook! And then he starts breaking up all the chairs and everything, and his father's freaking out. It's like, what are you doing, breaking all these chairs? What are we going to sit on? And then Pinocchio lights them on fire. He's a master of fire. It's a shamanic ritual, but he is a master of fire. That's what a human being is. He gets everything burning. Of course, Geppetto's all freaked out about that, because what are they going to sit on? And Pinocchio thinks, who cares about sitting? We're going to solve the problem once and for all. And so then the whale turns into a fire-breathing dragon, which is a pretty damn weird thing for a whale to do. Half kills Pinocchio. He washes up on shore dead, but he saves his father. And then at the very end of the movie, he's lying on his bed, all drowned. They're all like having a... So he's a dead puppet now. It's like, do you want to be a live puppet or a dead puppet? Well, maybe the dead puppet is better than the live puppet. It depends on where you're going. So then he's on the bed. The blue fairy comes down and says, well, you've been honest and courageous. Bang. Now you're real. You know, and then they have a little party. And that's just exactly right. You got that exactly right. So that's part of the hero mythology, is the rescuing of the father.
Why do you have to rescue the father?
Because otherwise you're a corpse. Like, you're a historical creature. You're a cultural creature. You cannot live without your culture. You think you can, but you can't. It disappears, and you don't even, look, I'll give you an example. In the Mesopotamian creation myth, which I'm going to tell you about next week, one of the things that happens is that the first round of gods, so they're like primordial forces, they're pretty damn careless, and they kill their father, and they make this place to live on his corpse. Okay, that's where we live. We live on the corpse of our ancestors because we live in this society. It's dead. It's the product of dead people. So it's got this dead element, but we're living on it. Okay, they're very careless. They kill it so that they render it completely dead. Well, what happens is Tiamat, who's the mother of chaos, she comes flooding back and she thinks, oh, you killed the thing that protects you. You just wait to see what happens. And that's exactly it. You kill the thing that structures you. You won't know it. It's like Nietzsche's prediction from the death of God. It's like, you killed this. You think, oh, it doesn't make any difference. It's like, wrong. It's like the Striders protecting the hobbits. You get rid of that thing that protects you, and chaos comes flooding in, and you have no idea what's possible. We do, though, because we lived through the 20th century. We know exactly what's possible. You know, hundreds of millions of unnecessary deaths. That's what's possible. We're lucky we didn't blow the whole damn thing up. So, and we still could. So, people pursuing their dead ideologies. You don't rescue the dead father, you're the puppet of death. That's what you are.
So like I said, fatherhood is a major theme in this TV show. And so you see Daniel brings back Mr. Miyagi and his teachings. He resurrects his father. It's funny, both Daniel and Johnny didn't grow up with their biological dads. Or at least Johnny really didn't know his biological dad. Daniel had his up until like age 8 when he died. But they had adopted fathers. They took on fathers who represented different ideologies or ways of life. And Mr. Miyagi, he represents tradition, the old Okinawan karate. And it's whenever Daniel remembers what Mr. Miyagi would say, that's when he would get back on track and find his balance. Johnny, too, attempts to resurrect his father, Kreese. But his father is a deceiver, just like a serpent, and he has no ancient wisdom to impart. He represents only the new, current trends in karate. And what does Kreese do? Like an ideology, he infects and possesses Cobra Kai, and he calls for war. It's like, just over different points of view in different camps, he's willing to bring about a war, a lethal one. And it's just like what we're seeing now with Antifa and Black Lives Matter, rioters calling for a Marxist revolution, a complete dismantling of our history, and a condemnation of the wisdom of our fathers. To them, everything must burn. And so, yes, I got all of that out of a TV show spin-off of an 80s martial arts movie franchise. Okay? It just fit right in with our zeitgeist. With everything going on right now, I hope we can learn these lessons before we destroy ourselves. Alright, that's all for now. So, if you dig what I'm saying, please like, share, comment, subscribe. I'll see you next time.